stood in the doorway of her son's bedroom, watching him sleep peacefully. The moonlight filtered through the white curtains, casting soft shadows across his face. Her heart ached with a familiar pain that never seemed to fade, no matter how many years passed. Her son, Daniel, was 12 years old now, and every day she wondered if she had made the right choices in raising him. Nobody in their small neighborhood of Riverside knew who really was. To them, she was just another single mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet. She waitressed at the local diner during the day and cleaned offices at night. Her hands were rough from constant work, her back hurt from long hours on her feet, and her clothes were simple and worn. She drove an old sedan that coughed and sputtered every morning when she started it. She lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days, but was hiding a secret that would shock everyone who knew her. She was the heir to the technology fortune, worth over $3 billion. Her father had built an empire creating computer chips and software that powered half the world's devices. When he died 5 years ago, he left everything to his only child. But there was a condition in his will that made life complicated. She had to prove that she could raise her son without the corruption of wealth, without the entitlement that money brings, and without losing touch with what real life meant for ordinary people. Her father had grown up poor, struggling every day just to eat. He remembered what it felt like to have nothing, and he never forgot those lessons even when he became incredibly wealthy. He watched other rich families raise spoiled children who had no understanding of hard work, no appreciation for what they had, and no respect for people who were less fortunate. He didn't want that for his grandson. So he created a trust that could only access when Daniel turned 18, and only if she raised him as an ordinary child, teaching him the values of hard work, honesty, and compassion. It agreed to these terms because she understood her father's wisdom. She had seen too many wealthy families destroy their children with money. She had childhood friends who grew up with everything they wanted but became miserable adults with no purpose, no drive, and no real happiness. Money had become their curse instead of their blessing. She wanted better for Daniel. She wanted him to grow up strong, independent, and grateful for what he had. So she hid her wealth and lived like everyone else in Riverside. She worked hard, paid her bills, and taught Daniel that nothing in life came free. He had chores to do every day. He earned his allowance by helping with housework. When he wanted a new video game, he had to save his money for months. When his shoes wore out, they went to the discount store to find affordable replacements. He attended the public school in their neighborhood, rode the bus with other kids, and ate the same cafeteria food as everyone else. Daniel never complained. He was a good boy with a kind heart and a gentle spirit. He did well in school, made friends easily, and always helped his mother without being asked. He seemed happy with their simple life, and that made Phil proud of the job she was doing. She was succeeding at her father's challenge, raising a son who was grounded in reality and grateful for what he had. But everything changed one autumn morning when received a phone call from Daniel's school. The principal's voice was tense and worried. There had been an incident. Daniel had collapsed during gym class. An ambulance was on the way. His world stopped spinning for a moment as terror gripped her heart. She dropped everything and ran to the hospital, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel of her old car. At the hospital, doctors ran tests for hours while waited in agony. Finally, a neurologist came to speak with her. Daniel had a rare condition affecting his spine and leg muscles. It was degenerative, meaning it would get worse over time. He would need a wheelchair soon. The treatment options were limited and expensive. Without proper care, Daniel might lose all mobility in his lower body within a few years. Physical therapy could help slow the progression, but it needed to start immediately and continue for years. Listened to all of this with a calm expression on her face, but inside she was screaming. This couldn't be happening to her sweet boy. He was only 12 years old. He loved playing soccer with his friends. He loved riding his bike around the neighborhood. How could she tell him that his life was about to change forever? The doctor handed her estimates for the treatment costs. Physical therapy 3 times per week, special equipment, medications, possible surgeries in the future. The numbers made his head spin. Even with her 2 jobs, even working every hour she could, there was no way she could afford this kind of care. The basic insurance she had through the diner covered almost nothing. She would need tens of thousands of dollars every year just for the essential treatments. For the first time since her father died, considered breaking her promise. She had billions of dollars sitting in a trust fund. She could give Daniel the best medical care in the world. She could hire the top specialists, send him to the best rehabilitation centers, buy him every piece of equipment he needed. All she had to do was access the money. But her father's will was very specific. If she used the trust fund before Daniel turned 18, she would lose everything. The money would go to charity, and she would be left with nothing. More importantly, she would have failed her father's test. She would have proven that she couldn't raise her son properly without depending on wealth to solve her problems. Struggled with this decision for days. She barely slept. She couldn't eat. She watched Daniel learning to use his wheelchair, trying so hard to be brave, and her heart broke into a million pieces. He never complained. He never asked why this was happening to him. He just accepted his new reality with a courage that made both proud and devastated. She decided she would find a way without the trust fund. She would work harder, take on more jobs, ask for loans if she had to. She would sell everything she owned if necessary. But she wouldn't break her promise to her father, and she wouldn't fail Daniel by teaching him that money could solve every problem. Picked up extra shifts at the diner. She started cleaning more offices at night. She contacted every charity and assistance program she could find. Some helped a little, but it wasn't nearly enough. Daniel needed intensive physical therapy, and the local clinic had a waiting list months long. Every day that passed without treatment meant his condition could worsen. She watched her son struggle with simple tasks that had been easy before. Getting dressed took him twice as long. Going to the bathroom required assistance. Moving around their apartment in his wheelchair was difficult because the space was small and cluttered. The building didn't have an elevator, so had to carry Daniel up and down 3 flights of stairs every day. He was getting bigger and heavier, and she didn't know how much longer she could manage. The other kids at school started treating Daniel differently. Some were kind and helpful, but others were cruel. They made jokes about his wheelchair. They excluded him from games and activities. Daniel pretended it didn't bother him, but saw the sadness in his eyes. She saw him withdrawing into himself, becoming quieter and more isolated. One evening, sat at their small kitchen table with bills spread out in front of her. She had been adding and subtracting numbers for hours, trying to make everything work. But no matter how she calculated, there wasn't enough money. She couldn't afford Daniel's medical care and their basic living expenses. Something had to give. She put her head in her hands and finally let herself cry. She had been so strong for so long, but she was exhausted. She was failing her son. All the money in the world sat in a bank account with her name on it, but she couldn't touch it. What kind of mother let her child suffer when she had the resources to help him? What kind of person put a promise to a dead man above the of her living son? But then she thought about her father's wisdom. He had lived through real poverty and understood something that was only beginning to learn. Money didn't solve every problem. In fact, sometimes money created more problems than it solved. If she gave Daniel everything easily, if she used wealth to shield him from every difficulty, what would that teach him about life? Would he learn resilience? Would he develop strength? Would he appreciate the good things that came his way? Her father had believed that struggle built character. He had believed that facing challenges and overcoming obstacles was how people grew into their best selves. He wanted Daniel to have that opportunity, even if it meant suffering in the short term. Wiped her tears and made a decision. She would continue doing everything in her power to help Daniel without using the trust fund. She would teach him that determination and hard work could overcome any obstacle. She would show him that strength came from within, not from a bank account. She started researching alternative treatments and therapies. She found a community center that offered free physical therapy sessions twice a month. It wasn't as much as Daniel needed, but it was something. She learned exercises she could do with him at home to supplement the professional therapy. She spent hours every night watching videos and reading articles about how to help children with mobility issues. She also made changes to their apartment to make life easier for Daniel. She rearranged furniture to create wider pathways for his wheelchair. She installed grab bars in the bathroom. She built a simple ramp out of plywood so Daniel could get in and out of their front door more easily. Every improvement was made with her own hands, using materials she could afford or found discarded in dumpsters. Daniel watched his mother work tirelessly, and something shifted in him. He stopped feeling sorry for himself. He started working harder in his physical therapy. He pushed himself to do exercises even when they hurt. He practiced using his wheelchair until he could navigate their apartment and his school with confidence. He studied harder in his classes, determined to prove that his disability didn't define him. The relationship between and Daniel grew stronger through their shared struggle. They became a team, supporting each other through every difficulty. When was exhausted from working double shifts, Daniel would have dinner ready for her, something simple he could prepare from his wheelchair. When Daniel was frustrated with his limitations, would remind him of how far he had come and how proud she was of his progress. Months passed this way, was exhausted all the time, running on too little sleep and too much coffee. She lost weight because she often skipped meals to save money for Daniel's care. Her hands developed painful arthritis from all the physical labor. She aged years in just months, her face lined with worry and fatigue. But Daniel was improving. The physical therapy was working, even though it was less frequent than the doctors recommended. He was maintaining his muscle strength and mobility. He learned to transfer himself from his wheelchair to other seats. He became more independent, able to do more things for himself. His confidence grew, and he started making friends again at school, kids who saw past his wheelchair to the person he really was. Then one day, something happened that changed everything. Was at work at the diner, serving lunch to the usual crowd of regulars. She was moving quickly between tables, taking orders and delivering food, when she overheard a conversation at the booth near the window. Two men in expensive suits were having a business discussion. One of them was looking at documents and shaking his head. "The Technology Trust Fund," he said. "Such a waste. $3 billion sitting unused because the heir refuses to access it. Can you imagine living in poverty when you're actually a billionaire?" Froze, a coffee pot in her hand. She tried to act normal, but her heart was racing. How did these people know about her situation? The trust fund was supposed to be private, managed by lawyers who were bound to confidentiality. The other man laughed. "I heard she's working as a waitress while her disabled son struggles with medical bills, all because of some ridiculous condition in her father's will. She could give that kid the best care in the world, but she's too stubborn to break the terms of the trust." "Someone should report her," the first man said. "That's child neglect. She has the resources to help her son, but she's choosing not to use them. That's abuse." His hands started shaking. She set down the coffee pot before she dropped it. Child neglect? Abuse? Is that what people thought of her? She was working herself to death trying to provide for Daniel, trying to teach him important values, trying to honor her father's wishes. But to outsiders, it looked like she was deliberately withholding care from her disabled son. She finished her shift in a daze, her mind spinning with worry. That evening, she sat Daniel down and tried to explain the situation to him. She had never told him about the trust fund before. He had always believed they were poor because that was their reality. Now she had to tell him the truth. "Daniel," she said, her voice shaking, "there's something I need to tell you about our family, about who we really are." Daniel looked at his mother with concern. He could see how upset she was. "What's wrong, Mom? Are you okay?" Took a deep breath and told him everything. She explained about his grandfather's fortune, about the trust fund, about the conditions in the will. She told him that they could have been living in luxury all this time, that she could have given him the best medical care from the moment of his diagnosis. She explained why she had chosen to live the way they did, to honor her father's wishes and teach Daniel important lessons about life. When she finished talking, there was a long silence, waited anxiously to see how Daniel would react. Would he be angry? Would he feel betrayed? Would he resent her for making him suffer when they didn't have to? Finally, Daniel spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. "Mom, I understand why you did this, and I'm not mad at you. I think Grandpa was smart. I've seen other kids at school who have everything but aren't happy. They don't appreciate anything. They're mean and selfish. I don't want to be like that." Felt tears streaming down her face. Her son's maturity and understanding overwhelmed her. "But you've been suffering," she said. "You need medical care that I can't afford to give you." Daniel reached out and took his mother's hand. "I'm not suffering, Mom. Yeah, using a wheelchair is hard sometimes, but I'm okay. We're making it work. And I'm learning so much from doing things the hard way. I'm stronger now than I was before, not just in my body, but in my mind too. I wouldn't trade that for anything." Hugged her son tightly, amazed by his wisdom and strength. But even as she held him, she couldn't shake the worry that had been planted by those men in the diner. What if someone did report her for neglect? What if Child Services decided she was unfit because she had the means to help Daniel but chose not to use them? She could lose her son. The very thing she was trying to protect could be taken away from her. That night couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with scenarios and fears. She had thought she was doing the right thing, but maybe she had been wrong all along. Maybe her father's test was too harsh, too unreasonable. Maybe some situations required breaking the rules. The next morning made a decision. She would call the lawyers who managed the trust fund and ask them for advice. There had to be some way to access emergency funds for medical care without violating the terms of the will. Her father had been a reasonable man. Surely he would have made provisions for situations like this. But when she called the law firm, she received devastating news. The senior partner explained that the will was ironclad. There were no exceptions, no emergency clauses, no way to access the funds early without losing everything. His father had anticipated that she might try to find loopholes, so he had made the terms absolutely clear and binding. "I'm sorry, Ms., the lawyer said, but your father was very specific about this. He believed that true character was revealed in times of hardship. He wanted Daniel to grow up understanding the value of things, and he wanted you to learn how to solve problems without relying on money. If you access the trust early for any reason, even medical emergencies, you forfeit everything." Hung up the phone feeling more hopeless than ever. She was trapped. She couldn't use the money without losing it completely, but continuing to struggle meant potentially losing Daniel in other ways. What if his condition worsened because he wasn't getting adequate care? What if child services really did investigate her? What if Daniel came to resent her when he was older and realized they could have had an easier life? As grappled with these questions, something was happening that she didn't know about. Daniel had been thinking deeply about their situation. He understood now why his mother had made the choices she did, but he also saw how much she was suffering. She worked so hard, sacrificed so much, all to honor his grandfather's wishes and give Daniel a good life. He wanted to do something to help her, to show her that her efforts weren't in vain. Daniel started paying closer attention to everything happening around him. He noticed things about their neighborhood, their building, and the people they knew. He started asking questions and listening carefully to the answers. And slowly, he began to realize something that would change everything. His wheelchair had become more than just a mobility device. It had become his window into a world that most people never saw. From his seated position, he noticed things that others missed. He saw the way people treated him differently, sometimes with kindness and sometimes with cruelty. He understood what it felt like to be underestimated and overlooked, and he was learning lessons about human nature that would shape who he would become as a man. But there was something else Daniel was noticing, something specific about their situation that didn't add up. And when he figured out what it was, the truth would shake the foundations of everything. Daniel had always been an observant child, but his wheelchair had sharpened this quality into something extraordinary. He spent hours watching people, studying their behaviors, learning to read between the lines of what they said and did. And lately, he had been watching his mother very carefully. Something wasn't right. Thought she was hiding her stress well, but Daniel could see through her brave face. She came home exhausted every night, her shoulders slumped with worry. She smiled at him and asked about his day, but her eyes were distant, troubled. She checked their mailbox obsessively, her hands trembling when she opened bills. She spent hours on the phone whispering urgent conversations that she thought Daniel couldn't hear from his bedroom. One afternoon, Daniel was in the hallway outside their apartment when he encountered Mrs., their elderly neighbor from down the hall. She was struggling with grocery bags, so Daniel held the door open for her while she got her key. "Thank you, Daniel," Mrs. said warmly. "You're such a good boy. Your mother is lucky to have you." "Thank you, Mrs.," Daniel replied. Then carefully he added, "Can I ask you something? Have you noticed anything strange in our building lately? Any unusual people coming around?" Mrs. paused, her expression becoming serious. "Actually, yes. There was a man here last week asking questions about your mother. He said he was from some kind of agency. I didn't like the look of him, so I didn't tell him anything. But he talked to some other people in the building." Daniel felt his stomach tighten with worry. "What kind of agency?" "I'm not sure, dear. He showed me a badge, but I didn't have my glasses on. Why do you ask? Is everything okay?" Daniel forced himself to smile. "Everything's fine. I was just curious. Thank you for telling me." But everything was not fine. Daniel knew exactly what kind of agency would be sending people to ask questions about his mother. Child Protective Services. Someone had reported them, just like those men in the diner had suggested. Someone thought was neglecting Daniel by not using her wealth to provide better medical care. Daniel didn't tell his mother about the conversation with Mrs. She was already carrying too much worry. Instead, he decided to do some investigating of his own. He started using the computer at school to research their situation. He learned about child welfare laws, about what constituted neglect, about how investigations were conducted. What he discovered frightened him. If CPS decided that was capable of providing better care but chose not to, they could remove Daniel from her custody. It wouldn't matter that she was working multiple jobs and doing everything she could within the constraints she had chosen. All that would matter was that she had billions of dollars in a trust fund that she refused to access. Daniel realized they were in serious danger of being separated. The thought of losing his mother, of being placed in foster care or with some other family, made him feel sick with fear. Was everything to him. She was his whole world. He couldn't let that happen. But what could a 12-year-old boy in a wheelchair do to protect his family? Daniel thought about this problem for days. He considered every angle, every possibility. And then he remembered something his grandfather had written in a letter that had shown him. His grandfather believed that true strength came from using your mind, from solving problems creatively, from refusing to give up even when situations seemed hopeless. That's when Daniel started to form a plan. At school, Daniel had a teacher named Mr. who taught social studies. Mr. was young and enthusiastic, always encouraging his students to think critically about the world around them. Daniel had noticed that Mr. sometimes mentioned his wife, who worked as a lawyer specializing in family law. One day after class, Daniel approached Mr.'s desk. "Can I ask you something, Mr.? It's kind of personal." Mr. looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, Daniel, what's on your mind?" If someone had money but couldn't access it because of legal reasons, and they were being investigated for not using that money to help their child, what would happen? Mr.'s expression became very serious. "That's a complicated question, Daniel. Is this about you and your mother?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. There was no point in hiding the truth. Mr. was smart enough to figure it out anyway. "I thought it might be," Mr. said gently. "I've heard some things, some gossip around town, people talking about your mother being the technology heir, about the trust fund. Is it true?" "Yes," Daniel admitted. "But my mom isn't neglecting me. She's honoring my grandfather's wishes. He wanted me to grow up without being spoiled by wealth. He wanted me to understand the value of hard work and appreciate what I have. My mom is doing exactly what he asked her to do." Mr. leaned back in his chair, thinking. That's an interesting situation. But the law doesn't always care about intentions or philosophical beliefs. If someone reports your mother for having the means to provide better medical care but choosing not to, it could be seen as neglect. "That's not fair," Daniel said, his voice rising with emotion. "My mom works harder than anyone I know. She's sacrificing everything for me. Just because we're doing things differently doesn't mean I'm being neglected." "I agree with you," Mr. said, "but I'm not the one you need to convince. Tell you what, let me talk to my wife. She handles cases like this sometimes. Maybe she can offer some advice or at least tell us what to expect if an investigation does happen." Daniel felt a small spark of hope. "Would you really do that?" "Of course, you're a good kid, Daniel, and I can see how much you and your mother care about each other. Let me see what I can find out." 2 days later, Mr. asked Daniel to stay after class again. This time, his expression was grave. "I talked to my wife," Mr. said. "She said that your situation is legally very complex. The trust fund conditions are unusual but not illegal. However, if CPS decides to investigate, they'll focus on whether your current care meets the standard of what a reasonable parent would provide. The fact that your mother has the means to provide better care but chooses not to could be problematic." Daniel felt his hope crumbling. "So what can we do?" "My wife suggested documenting everything. Keep records of all the care you're receiving, all the efforts your mother is making, everything that shows she's doing her best within the constraints she's working under. Also, it might help to have testimony from medical professionals about your progress and—" "But my mom can't afford fancy doctors to write reports," Daniel said. "You don't need fancy doctors, you just need honest assessments from whoever is treating you. The free clinic, the community center therapists, even your school nurse. Anyone who can speak to your health and—" Daniel thanked Mr. and went home with his mind racing. He had to help his mother prepare for what might be coming. But he couldn't tell her about the CPS investigation without worrying her even more. He needed to gather the evidence quietly, build their defense without adding to her stress. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a detective in his own life. He asked the physical therapist at the community center to write a summary of his progress. He requested copies of his medical records from the free clinic. He asked his school nurse to document his overall health and development. He collected every piece of paper, every report, every document that showed he was thriving despite their difficult circumstances. He also started writing. Every evening he wrote in a journal about his life, his feelings, his relationship with his mother. He described the lessons she had taught him, the values she had instilled, the sacrifices she made daily. He wrote about how using a wheelchair had made him stronger, more resilient, more aware of what really mattered in life. He documented everything so that if anyone ever questioned whether he was being properly cared for, there would be proof of the truth. Meanwhile was facing her own crisis. The whispers had grown louder. People in their neighborhood were talking about the heir living among them. Customers at the diner gave her strange looks. Other parents at Daniel's school avoided her, as if poverty and struggle were contagious diseases they might catch. Worse, she started receiving official-looking letters. The first one came from the county social services department, informing her that a complaint had been filed and an investigation was being opened. They would be sending a caseworker to evaluate Daniel's living situation and assess whether his needs were being adequately met. Read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking. This was her worst fear coming true. Someone was trying to take Daniel away from her, all because she had chosen to honor her father's wishes, to teach her son values that she believed were more important than money. She wanted to run to the lawyers to break open the trust fund, to use her billions to hire the best legal team in the country to fight this. But she knew that doing so would only prove the complainant's point. She would be admitting that money was the solution, that wealth was what Daniel needed, that her father's philosophy was wrong. No, she had to fight this her way. She had to prove that she was a good mother, that Daniel was thriving, that their lifestyle was a choice, not neglect. Started preparing for the investigation with grim determination. She cleaned their apartment until it sparkled. She organized all of Daniel's medical records and therapy schedules. She made lists of everything she did for Daniel, every way she supported him, every sacrifice she made. She prepared to defend her choices and her parenting with everything she had. The caseworker arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon. She was a middle-aged woman named Sandra Mills with sharp eyes and a skeptical expression. She spent hours in their apartment, inspecting everything, asking questions, taking notes. She interviewed Daniel. She looked through their fridge, their closets, their bathroom. She examined Daniel's wheelchair, his adaptive equipment, his school supplies. Daniel answered all of Sandra's questions honestly but carefully. He explained about his condition, his treatment, his progress. He talked about his mother's sacrifices and his own efforts to stay healthy and active. He showed her his journal, the documentation he had gathered, the evidence of a child who was not neglected but deeply loved and well cared for. Sandra spent a long time reading Daniel's journal entries. Her expression softened as she read his words, his descriptions of his mother's love and dedication, his own gratitude and resilience. "You're quite a remarkable young man," Sandra said finally. "Many children in your situation would be angry or bitter. You seem well-adjusted and happy." "I am happy," Daniel said simply. "My mom is the best mom in the world. She works so hard for me. I have everything I need." "But you could have more," Sandra pointed out. "Your mother has significant wealth that she's choosing not to use for your care." "I know about the money," Daniel said. "My mom told me everything, and I understand why she's doing what she's doing. My grandfather was wise. He knew that having everything handed to you doesn't make you strong or happy. My mom is teaching me to be independent, to work hard, to appreciate what I have. Those are the best gifts she could give me." Sandra made more notes, her pen scratching across her pad. "What about your medical care? Do you feel you're getting adequate treatment?" "I'm getting good treatment," Daniel said. "Is it the best treatment money could buy? No, but it's working. I'm maintaining my mobility. I'm learning to adapt. And I'm learning that you don't need unlimited resources to have a good life. That's an important lesson." Sandra interviewed several other people over the following days. She talked to Daniel's teachers, his physical therapist, their neighbors, even the manager at the diner where worked. She built a complete picture of their lives, their struggles, their triumphs. Finally, 3 weeks after her first visit, Sandra returned to deliver her verdict. Was so nervous she felt sick. Everything depended on this moment. If Sandra recommended that Daniel be removed from her care, would lose her son and fail her father's test. Everything she had worked for would be destroyed. Sandra sat at their kitchen table with a thick folder of reports and notes. She looked at with an expression that was hard to read. Ms. Sandra began, this has been one of the most unusual cases I've handled in my 15 years as a social worker. Your situation is extraordinary. You have immense wealth that you're choosing not to use, while working multiple minimum wage jobs and struggling to make ends meet. On the surface, it looks like you're deliberately depriving your son of advantages that are readily available to him. Felt her heart sinking. This was it. She was going to lose Daniel. But Sandra continued, however, after thoroughly investigating your situation, interviewing everyone involved in Daniel's life, and spending considerable time with both of you, I've come to a different conclusion. What you're doing isn't neglect. It's unconventional, certainly. It's difficult, absolutely. But it's not neglect. Felt tears starting to form in her eyes. Daniel is one of the healthiest, most well-adjusted children I've encountered, Sandra said. Not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. He's thriving in school. He has friends. He's receiving adequate medical care, even if it's not the most expensive care available. More importantly, he has a mother who loves him deeply and is teaching him valuable life lessons. So what does this mean? Asked, her voice barely a whisper. It means I'm closing the investigation, Sandra said. I'm recommending no further action. In my professional opinion, Daniel is being well cared for. You're meeting his needs, both physical and emotional. The fact that you could afford to provide more doesn't obligate you to do so, especially when what you're currently providing is adequate and your reasons for living this way are sound. Broke down crying, overwhelmed with relief. Daniel wheeled over and hugged his mother tightly. They had survived this threat. They had proven that their way of life, while unusual, was valid and good. Sandra stood to leave but paused at the door. Ms., can I offer you some unsolicited advice? Wiped her tears and nodded. What you're doing is admirable, and I respect your commitment to your father's wishes. But don't let pride or stubbornness prevent you from accepting help when you truly need it. There's a difference between teaching your son to appreciate hard work and running yourself into the ground. Take care of yourself too, not just Daniel. He needs you healthy and present, not exhausted and worn out. After Sandra left and Daniel sat together in silence for a long time. They had won this battle, but the war wasn't over. They still had 6 more years until Daniel turned 18 and the trust fund became accessible. 6 more years of struggling, working, scraping by. But something had changed. They had faced a serious threat and survived it together. They had proven to themselves and to the world that they were strong enough to live by their principles, even when it was hard, even when people judged them, even when they were questioned and investigated and doubted. Daniel looked at his mother and saw someone who was truly heroic, not because she had wealth or power, but because she had integrity and strength of character. She was willing to sacrifice comfort and ease to teach him important lessons. She was willing to be misunderstood and criticized to honor her father's wisdom. And looked at her son and saw someone who was growing into an exceptional young man. The wheelchair had not diminished him. The struggle had not broken him. If anything, their difficult circumstances had revealed strength and wisdom in Daniel that might never have emerged if he had grown up wealthy and privileged. But as they sat there together, neither of them knew that the biggest challenge was still to come. Neither of them knew that soon would question everything she thought she knew about Daniel's condition. And when she learned the truth, it would change both of their lives forever. The first hint that something was wrong came a few weeks later. Was carrying Daniel down the 3 flights of stairs from their apartment to the street, as she did every morning before school. Daniel usually wrapped his arms around her neck and stayed still, making it as easy as possible for her to manage his weight. But on this particular morning, as reached the 2nd-floor landing, Daniel shifted suddenly. His leg moved in a way it shouldn't have been able to move. Almost lost her balance, nearly dropping both of them. Daniel, be careful, she said sharply, frightened by how close they had come to falling. Sorry, Mom, Daniel said quickly, but there was something odd about his tone, something guilty. Carried him the rest of the way down, but her mind was troubled. Daniel's leg had moved with more strength and control than it should have had. According to his doctors, his condition was degenerative. He should be losing mobility, not maintaining or improving it. Over the next few days, watched Daniel more carefully. She started noticing small things that didn't add up. The way he positioned himself in his wheelchair. The way he transferred from his chair to other seats. Sometimes his movements seemed too controlled, too strong, too deliberate. One evening was cleaning the bathroom when she noticed something on the floor near the toilet. Scuff marks, shoe prints, fresh ones. She looked at them closely, her heart starting to pound. Those marks were in a position that suggested someone had been standing there. Standing, not sitting in a wheelchair. His mind began racing. She thought about Daniel's therapy progress. She thought about the way he sometimes seemed to catch himself before moving in ways that might reveal too much ability. She thought about how he always insisted on privacy in the bathroom, always closed the door, always took a long time. A terrible suspicion began growing in her mind, a suspicion so awful that she didn't want to believe it. That night after Daniel was asleep, did something she had never done before. She went into his bedroom and searched through his things. She felt guilty doing it, like she was violating his privacy and trust. But she had to know. In the back of Daniel's closet, hidden under some old clothes, found a box. Inside the box were papers, medical research articles about spinal conditions, notes in Daniel's handwriting about symptoms and progression of various diseases, and at the bottom, a journal entry that makes blood run cold. It was dated from several months ago, shortly after Daniel's diagnosis. In his careful handwriting, Daniel had written his plan, his terrible, heartbreaking plan that could barely comprehend as she read it. Sat on Daniel's bedroom floor, the journal trembling in her hands as she read her son's words over and over, trying to make sense of what she was discovering. Her world was crumbling around her. Everything she thought she knew was a lie. According to the journal entries, Daniel did have a medical condition. The initial diagnosis was real, but it wasn't nearly as severe as the doctors had believed. His symptoms had been mild, treatable with minimal intervention. The degenerative progression they feared would happen hadn't happened. In fact, Daniel had been slowly improving with the basic physical therapy he received. But instead of celebrating this good news, instead of telling that he was getting better, Daniel had made a choice. He had decided to pretend his condition was worse than it was. He had researched his disease thoroughly, learned exactly what symptoms he should be displaying, and manufactured them convincingly enough to fool everyone. In his journal, Daniel explained his reasoning. He wrote that he knew his mother was destroying herself trying to provide for him. He saw her exhaustion, her pain, her worry. He understood that she was refusing to use the trust fund because of her principles, but he could see that the struggle was killing her slowly. So Daniel had formed a plan. If his condition seemed worse, if the medical needs seemed more urgent and desperate, eventually would have to break. She would have to access the trust fund to save him. And once she did that, Daniel reasoned she could stop working herself to death. She could take care of her own health. She could rest. He was willing to sacrifice his mobility, his independence, his childhood, all to force his mother to take care of herself. He was willing to live in a wheelchair he didn't need, to pretend to be disabled, to lie to everyone, including doctors and therapists, all because he loved his mother that much. Felt like she couldn't breathe. The magnitude of what Daniel had done, the sacrifice he had been willing to make, was too enormous to process. Her 12-year-old son had been living a lie for months, all for her. But there was more in the journal. Recent entries showed that Daniel's plan wasn't working the way he expected. Hadn't broken. She hadn't accessed the trust fund, even when things got desperate. Instead, she had just worked harder, sacrificed more. And Daniel had started to realize that his plan was actually making things worse, not better. The most recent entry, dated just a few days ago, showed Daniel struggling with what to do. He wanted to confess, to tell the truth, but he was terrified of what would happen. She would be hurt. She would feel betrayed. She might never trust him again. And what about the CPS investigation they had just survived? If anyone discovered that Daniel had been faking or exaggerating his condition, they could interpret it as manipulating her son to gain sympathy, even though she hadn't known anything about it. Daniel was trapped in a lie of his own making, unable to see a way out that didn't destroy everything. Sat in the darkness of Daniel's room, tears streaming down her face. She felt so many emotions at once that she couldn't sort them out. Betrayal because her son had lied to her for months. Guilt because her choices had driven him to such desperate measures. Pride because even in his deception, Daniel had been motivated by love and selflessness. Anger because he had put himself through unnecessary suffering. Relief because his condition wasn't as bad as they thought. Fear about what this revelation meant for everything they had built. She didn't know what to do. Should she confront Daniel immediately? Should she wait until morning? Should she pretend she didn't know and give him the chance to confess on his own? Stayed up all night, wrestling with these questions. By the time the sun rose, she had made a decision. She would talk to Daniel honestly, openly, without anger or judgment. They would face this truth together, the way they had faced everything else. When Daniel woke up and came out of his bedroom in his wheelchair, was waiting at the kitchen table. She had made his favorite breakfast, pancakes with chocolate chips, but her face was serious. "Daniel," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Daniel looked at his mother and immediately knew something was wrong. "What's wrong, Mom? Did something happen?" "You could say that," replied. "I found your journal last night, the one hidden in your closet. I read it." The color drained from Daniel's face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. All his worst fears were coming true in this moment. "Before you say anything," continued, "I want you to know that I'm not angry. I'm hurt, yes, confused, absolutely, but not angry. I understand why you did what you did. And I need you to be completely honest with me now. No more lies, no more pretending. Can you do that?" Daniel nodded, tears already starting to fall down his cheeks. "How much of your condition is real?" asked gently. "How much have you been faking?" Daniel took a shaky breath. "The condition is real," he said. "I really do have the spine and muscle issues, but they're mild, Mom, much milder than we thought. The doctors said with basic therapy I should be fine. I might have some weakness, but I wouldn't need a wheelchair. I could walk, run, do everything normal kids do." "So why did you pretend otherwise?" "Because you were killing yourself," Daniel burst out, all his pent-up emotions flooding out. "You work all the time, you never sleep, you never eat. You're getting sicker and weaker every day. I could see you fatting away and I couldn't stand it anymore. I thought if my condition was bad enough, you would finally break and use the trust fund. Then you could stop working so hard, you could rest, you could take care of yourself." Reached across the table and took Daniel's hands. "Oh, sweetheart, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have sacrificed yourself for me." "But you're sacrificing yourself for me every day," Daniel protested. "You're honoring Grandpa's wishes, teaching me values, working yourself to death. I just wanted to help you. I wanted to give you a reason to stop struggling." "Daniel, do you understand what you've done? You've been lying to doctors, therapists, social workers. If anyone finds out, there could be serious consequences. They might think I put you up to it, that I was manipulating you to gain sympathy or avoid the CPS investigation." "I know," Daniel whispered. "I didn't think it through. I just wanted to help and now everything is a mess. I'm sorry, Mom, I'm so sorry." Stood up and went around the table to hug her son. She held him while he cried, his body shaking with sobs. She cried too, overwhelmed by the complexity of their situation and the depth of her son's love. "We have to tell the truth," said finally. "We have to contact his doctors and explain what happened. There might be consequences, but we'll face them together. No more lies, no more deception, agreed." Daniel nodded against his mother's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I just love you so much. I couldn't watch you suffer anymore." "I know, baby, I know, and I love you too. That's why we're going to figure this out together." Over the next few days, and Daniel began the difficult process of revealing the truth. They started with Daniel's physical therapist at the community center, a kind woman named Rachel who had been working with Daniel for months. Rachel was shocked at first, then concerned, then thoughtful. "I need to ask you something, Daniel," she said carefully. "Were you pretending to have symptoms you didn't have, or were you just not trying as hard as you could in therapy?" Daniel thought about this. "A little of both," he admitted. "Sometimes I would act like movements were harder than they really were, but mostly I just held back. I didn't push myself the way I could have. I wanted everyone to think I was progressing slowly or not at all." Rachel looked at, "I need to be honest with you. This is a serious ethical issue. Daniel has been receiving treatment under false pretenses. I have to report this to my supervisor and they'll need to decide how to handle it." Nodded, "I understand. We're prepared to face whatever consequences come. We just want to be honest now." The community center supervisor was more severe in her reaction. She was angry that resources meant for truly disabled people had been used by someone who didn't need them as much. She talked about liability and fraud. She threatened to report the situation to authorities. But Rachel defended Daniel. "This child was trying to protect his mother," Rachel said firmly. "Was it wrong? Yes. Was it misguided? Absolutely. But it came from love, not malice, and he's only 12 years old. He made a mistake. Let's focus on correcting it, not punishing him." Eventually, the supervisor agreed not to press charges or file official complaints, but Daniel was banned from using the community center's services. Accepted this consequence, knowing it was fair under the circumstances. The next step was harder. They had to tell Daniel's doctors at the free clinic. The physician who had been treating Daniel was deeply disappointed. She explained that misrepresenting symptoms wasn't just unethical, it was dangerous. What if she had prescribed treatments or medications based on false information? What if Daniel had been harmed by unnecessary interventions? But when she examined Daniel thoroughly, testing his actual mobility and strength, she found that his condition really was mild. With proper physical therapy and exercise, which Daniel could now do on his own at home, he should recover fully. He might have some lingering weakness, but nothing that would significantly impact his quality of life. "You're very lucky," the doctor told Daniel seriously. "You're lucky your real condition is manageable. You're lucky you didn't do permanent damage to yourself by restricting your movement for so long. And you're lucky you have a mother who loves you enough to face the truth, even when it's painful." The hardest conversation was with Sandra Mills, the CPS caseworker. Called her and requested a meeting, knowing that this revelation could reopen the investigation and put Daniel's custody at risk again. Sandra listened to the whole story with an unreadable expression. When Daniel finished explaining everything, Sandra sat in silence for a long moment. "This is quite a situation," she finally said. "I investigated you for neglect when in reality your son was well enough that he didn't need the intensive care we thought he did. That changes things significantly." "Are you going to reopen the investigation?" asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Sandra shook her head slowly. "No, I'm not. Do you know why?" And Daniel both looked at her with surprise. "Because this situation, as messed up as it is, actually proves something important. It proves that you two have a strong, loving relationship. Daniel's actions, while misguided, came from a place of deep love and concern for you, Ms. And your reaction, instead of anger or punishment, has been understanding and forgiveness. You're addressing this problem together, taking responsibility, facing consequences. That's good parenting. That's a healthy family dynamic." Felt tears of relief welling up in her eyes. Sandra continued, "What I see here is a child who was so worried about his mother's that he was willing to sacrifice his own health and happiness. That level of empathy and selflessness doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from being raised by someone who models those qualities every day. Yes, Daniel made a terrible choice. But he's 12 years old, and he was trying to solve an adult problem in the only way he could think of. Now he's learning from this mistake, which is exactly what childhood is supposed to be about." "So what happens now?" Daniel asked quietly. "Now you stop using the wheelchair except for when your actual symptoms require it," Sandra said. "You do physical therapy at home to rebuild the strength and mobility you've lost by restricting yourself these past months. You learn from this experience, and you don't ever lie about your health again. Deal?" "Deal," Daniel said quickly. After Sandra left, sat with Daniel on their worn couch. "We have a lot to talk about," she said. "About my choices, about the trust fund, about everything." "I understand why you did what you did," Daniel said. "Grandpa was right. I've learned so much by living this way. I know what hard work means now. I appreciate things. I understand that money doesn't solve every problem. But Mom, Grandpa couldn't have known you'd work yourself sick. He couldn't have known I would get hurt. Don't you think he would want you to be healthy and happy?" Had been thinking about this a lot. "Maybe you're right," she admitted. "Maybe I've been too rigid about the rules. Maybe honoring my father's wishes doesn't mean destroying myself in the process." "What if we found a middle way?" Daniel suggested. "What if we kept living simply, but you didn't work so many hours? What if you used just enough of the trust fund to take care of your health, but we still kept the same values and lifestyle?" Shook her head. "The trust is all or nothing. I can't access part of it. If I use any of the money before you turn 18, I lose all of it." "Then maybe we should lose it," Daniel said quietly. Stared at her son in shock. "What?" "Maybe the money isn't worth what it's costing us," Daniel said. "Look at what it's done to our lives. It's made you work too hard. It's made me lie about being disabled. It's caused investigations and stress and fear. Maybe Grandpa's test was wrong. Maybe some tests aren't worth passing." Thought about her father, about his beliefs and his wisdom. She thought about the years of struggle, the exhaustion, the constant worry. She thought about what the money could buy for them, the comfort and security and opportunity. But she also thought about what they already had, the strength they had built together, the character Daniel was developing, the relationship they shared. "What if we made a compromise?" said slowly, an idea forming. What if we acknowledge that my father's test has served its purpose? You've learned the lessons he wanted you to learn. You understand the value of hard work and humility and gratitude. You've developed character and strength that money could never buy. Maybe that's enough. Maybe we've proven what we needed to prove. What are you saying? Daniel asked. I'm saying that maybe it's time to prioritize our over a dead man's conditions, no matter how well-intentioned they were. I'm saying that maybe your grandfather, if he could see what we've been through, would tell me I've already passed his test. I'm saying that maybe I should access the trust fund, not because we want to be rich, but because continuing to destroy ourselves doesn't honor anyone's memory. Daniel looked at his mother with hope in his eyes. You mean it? I think I do, said. But we do it thoughtfully. We don't suddenly start living in a mansion and buying expensive cars. We use the money to secure our future, to ensure I don't have to work multiple jobs anymore to get you proper medical care. But we keep our values. We stay in this community. We remember where we came from and what we've learned. Over the next week, contacted the lawyers who managed the trust fund. She explained her decision to access the money before Daniel turned 18, knowing it meant forfeiting the full amount. The lawyers were confused at first, then realized she didn't understand the full terms of her father's will. Ms., the senior partner explained, you've misunderstood something crucial. Yes, the will states you forfeit the trust if you access it before Daniel turns 18. But there's a provision you apparently didn't read carefully. If you make it to Daniel's 15th birthday following the terms, you've essentially passed the test. After that, you can access a portion of the funds for essential needs like medical care without forfeiting everything. Your father wasn't trying to torture you for a full 18 years. He wanted you to prove you could raise Daniel right during his formative years. Felt like the wind had been knocked out of her. What? Why didn't you tell me this before? We assumed you knew. It's clearly stated in Section 7 of the will. You still have about 3 years until Daniel turns 15, but then you'll have much more flexibility. Hung up the phone in a daze. 3 more years. They only had to make it 3 more years, not 6. And once they reached that milestone, she could use some of the money for Daniel's care and her own health without losing everything. This changed the calculation entirely. 3 years felt manageable in a way that 6 years hadn't. She could do this. They could do this together. She shared this news with Daniel, and they both felt a weight lift from their shoulders. The finish line was closer than they thought. They just had to hold on a little longer. But there was still the issue of Daniel's condition and the wheelchair. Now that the truth was out, Daniel needed to stop pretending. He needed to rebuild his strength and mobility. He needed to show the world that he was okay. The transition was harder than either of them expected. Daniel had been using a wheelchair for months, and his body had adapted to that limitation. His muscles had weakened from disuse. His flexibility had decreased. He had to essentially rehabilitate himself, rebuilding strength and coordination he had deliberately suppressed. Worked with Daniel every day, doing exercises together, pushing him to regain his mobility. It was difficult and often painful. Daniel's legs would cramp. His back would ache. There were days when he wanted to give up, when the wheelchair seemed easier than the hard work of recovery. But wouldn't let him quit. You did this to yourself, she reminded him firmly but kindly. Now you have to undo it. You have to prove to yourself that you're stronger than this. Not for me, not for Grandpa, but for you. At school, the transition was complicated. Daniel had been the boy in the wheelchair for months. That's how everyone knew him. Now he was showing up on crutches, then with a cane, then walking slowly but steadily on his own. His classmates were confused. Teachers asked questions. Rumors started spreading. Some kids accused Daniel of faking his disability all along, of pretending to be disabled for attention or sympathy. Others defended him, saying he must have had a miraculous recovery. Daniel tried to explain the truth, that his condition had been real but milder than everyone thought, that he had made mistakes in how he handled it, but the explanation was too complicated for most people to understand or believe. His social studies teacher, pulled Daniel aside one day. I know this is hard, he said. People don't always understand complicated situations. They want simple explanations, but you know the truth and so do the people who matter. Focus on that. Daniel took this advice to heart. He stopped trying to explain himself to everyone. He focused on his recovery, on rebuilding his strength, on moving forward. He accepted that some people would think badly of him, and that was okay. He couldn't control what others thought. He could only control his own actions and choices. was facing similar challenges at work and in the neighborhood. People who had her or admired her struggle now looked at her with suspicion. If her son hadn't been as disabled as everyone thought, had she been manipulating people for sympathy? Had the whole thing been a scam? Mrs. Their elderly neighbor was one of the few people who understood. People always want simple stories, she told. Good guys and bad guys, heroes and villains. They don't like complicated truths where everyone makes mistakes but comes from a place of love. Don't worry about them. You and Daniel know what really happened. That's what matters. As months passed, Daniel made remarkable progress. He regained most of his mobility and strength. He could walk without assistance, run short distances, even play basketball with his friends, though he tired more easily than other kids. His actual condition, the mild spinal and muscle weakness, was manageable with regular exercise and occasional physical therapy. Reduced her work hours slightly, allowing herself to rest more. She was still working hard, still living simply, but she wasn't destroying her health anymore. She had found a better balance, knowing that in less than 3 years, they would have access to resources that could help them without abandoning their values. The relationship between and Daniel had changed through this ordeal. They were closer now, more honest with each other. They had both learned hard lessons about the dangers of deception, even when motivated by love. They had both learned that communication and trust were more important than any sacrifice or noble intention. One evening, about 8 months after the truth came out, and Daniel sat on their small balcony watching the sunset. They did this often now, taking time to just be together without stress or urgency. "Mom," Daniel said quietly, "do you think Grandpa would be proud of us, even though we messed up so much?" Thought about her father, about his wisdom and his flaws, his good intentions and his harsh conditions. "I think your grandfather would have learned something from watching us," she said. "I think he would have realized that his test, while well-intentioned, was too rigid. Life is more complicated than rules and conditions. Love is more important than lessons." "But did we learn what he wanted us to learn?" Daniel persisted. "Oh yes," said with certainty. "You learn to value hard work, to appreciate what you have, to understand that character matters more than wealth. Those lessons stuck even through all our mistakes. That's what matters." "I learned something else too," Daniel said. "I learned that you can't protect people you love by lying to them. You have to trust them with the truth, even when it's hard, even when you think it might hurt them." Hugged her son close. "That's a lesson I learned too. We both tried to protect each other in ways that ended up causing more harm than good. Now we know better." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Their journey wasn't over. They still had almost 3 years until they could access the trust fund resources. They still faced daily challenges and struggles, but they faced them together with honesty and love, and that made all the difference. Daniel was no longer in a wheelchair, but the experience had changed him permanently. He had a deeper understanding of disability and accessibility than most people his age. He had empathy for those who struggled with mobility issues. He understood what it felt like to be underestimated and overlooked. These were gifts that came from his time in the wheelchair, even though that time had been based on a lie. Was no longer killing herself with overwork, but she still maintained the simple lifestyle her father had envisioned. She had learned to set boundaries, to prioritize her health, to accept that honoring her father's memory didn't require destroying herself. These were lessons she needed to learn. The biggest lesson, though, was about love and sacrifice. Both and Daniel had been willing to sacrifice themselves for each other, had been willing to work herself to death to honor her father's wishes and teach Daniel values. Daniel had been willing to give up his mobility to force his mother to take care of herself. These sacrifices had been misguided, but they came from profound love. What they learned was that true love doesn't require sacrifice that destroys you. True love requires honesty, communication, and mutual care. It requires trusting the people you love with your struggles and allowing them to help you. It requires accepting help when you need it and offering help when others need it. The story of the hidden billionaire and her son in a wheelchair had seemed straightforward from the outside. A wealthy woman refusing to use her money to help her disabled son. But the truth had been far more complex. It was a story about a mother trying to teach her son important values. It was a story about a son trying to protect his mother from her own good intentions. It was a story about love expressed imperfectly, about mistakes made with pure motives, about two people learning to trust each other completely. As Daniel moved forward into their future, they carried these lessons with them. When Daniel finally turned 15, they accessed a portion of the trust fund, just enough to secure their basic needs and ensure could cut back to one job. They stayed in their apartment in Riverside. They maintained their simple lifestyle. They continued to value hard work and humility. When Daniel turned 18 and gained full access to the fortune, he didn't go crazy with spending. He didn't buy mansions or luxury cars. Instead, he used the money thoughtfully to create opportunities for himself and help others. He funded scholarships for disabled students. He donated to community centers that provided free physical therapy. He started a foundation to help single parents who were struggling to make ends meet. Watched her son use his wealth with wisdom and compassion, and she knew her father's test had ultimately succeeded, just not in the way anyone had expected. The lessons had been learned through struggle and mistakes, through lies exposed and truth embraced, through a journey far more complicated than a simple test of character. In the end, the hidden billionaire learned that her worth wasn't in her money or in her ability to live without it. Her worth was in her love for her son, her commitment to her values, and her willingness to face difficult truths. And her son learned that the best gifts weren't material things, but rather the qualities of character his mother had worked so hard to instill in him: the strength to face adversity, the wisdom to learn from mistakes, and the courage to love completely and honestly. Their story became a quiet legend in Riverside, a reminder that things are rarely as simple as they appear, that love can be expressed in complicated ways, and that the most important lessons in life often come through the hardest experiences. And though they faced many more challenges in the years that followed, and Daniel faced them together, with honesty and trust and a bond that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than ever. He was faking it. Daniel was faking his condition. Or at least, he was exaggerating it far beyond what his actual symptoms were. T thought she knew.